What is going on, Colts Nation? And welcome back to another episode of Bring the Juice. Your guy, Cody, here. And guys, wanted to talk today, now that the head coaching search is finally over, wanted to kind of give my thoughts on some potential guys that new Colts head coach Shane Steichen could be looking to fill. I'm going to talk about not every single positional opening right now for the team. I want to talk about some specific ones, namely the offensive coordinator, the offensive line coach, and then I want to briefly touch on the defensive coordinator and special teams coordinator. I guess I'll do that first, talk about those two. I do expect both Gus Bradley and Bubba Ventrone to return with their staffs, especially on the Gus Bradley's end, to return with the Colts in 2023. So I'm not really going to touch on them in this one. I'm more wanting to focus on the offensive side of things, with Steichen basically having to bring in his entire staff in anew here. So with that being said, wanted to talk about a few guys here, and let's start with the offense. Well, we'll start with the offensive line coach. There's only really a couple guys here that I think are of interest. The first guy is Roy Isvan. He's a Philadelphia Eagles assistant offensive line coach. It would make a ton of sense for him to bring him over and make him the offensive line coach for Indianapolis. The second one would be George Warhop. He was a former Houston offensive line coach, and him and Steichen, him and Steichen connected. I guess the connection there was all the way back in 2013 in Cleveland. But we'll see on that. And then I want to just kind of throw a third one out there. It's kind of a wild card. I don't know how much I really expect this to happen, but maybe Jeff Saturday would consider coming back to Indianapolis, serving in that kind of role, more of the offensive line where he played, for all his seasons in the NFL. I'm not super expecting him. I'm expecting Steichen to probably just pick some guys that he has some connections with. So it seems like those two guys, Isvan and Warhop, are kind of the two hot names right now that potentially could be those guys for Indianapolis, but I wanted to throw Saturday in there. But really the bread and butter of what I want to talk about here is the offensive coordinator position. Now, I feel like there's a lot more potential candidates here for this opening, and I want to just kind of touch on each of them briefly, kind of touch on their connection here with Shane Steichen and why it might make sense for Steichen to go in that direction. And I think there's a lot of potentially really good names here. There's a little bit of everything, right? There's some guys who have been head coaches, some guys who had ties to the Colts organization who have been here before, and then there's some other guys that are maybe up and coming a little bit. So wanted to start with a guy that I don't really think is very likely, and that's Brian Johnson, quarterback coach with Philadelphia. It's expected that he will take that offensive coordinator role from Steichen, and he will be the offensive coordinator for the Eagles this next year. But you never know, never say never with that connection. He was a quarterback's coach last year, and maybe Steichen makes a big push to bring him in. I want to never say never, but I think it's really expected that Philly will retain him and just promote him internally. But we shall see on that. One thing I want to talk about also, somebody else who kind of has some connection from the Philadelphia Eagles is Kevin Patullo. He is right now the passing game coordinator for Philadelphia. Obviously, the last two seasons with Steichen, he has that connection there. It would make a whole lot of sense. He'd be more of that newcomer, kind of, being promoted into a role, kind of like Sirianni was when he came over from the Chargers. So would that be potentially somebody that Steichen would consider, considering he's worked with him the last 2 years? I personally think that's probably the most intriguing option, and I guess the most unknown, because out of any of these guys, because he is one of those up and coming guys, and I could see it potentially being like a Reich Sirianni kind of thing, where maybe this guy, if all goes well, he's maybe a head coach in a couple of years. But Kevin Patullo's, I think, the hot name here, and I think probably the favorite right now, if I was just making a wild guess there. But a couple other guys, more guys that have been in the league for a while. You got to talk about Pep Hamilton. He was a former, so he's out of a job right now. He was a former Houston Texans offensive coordinator. That was his last position that he held. Obviously, him and Steichen have some connection with the Chargers when he served as the quarterback coach under Steichen in 2020. So they've crossed paths a little bit. And, Pep Hamilton, a lot of people remember from the Andrew Luck days where he was a Colts offensive coordinator. So I don't know, are the Colts open to having him back into Indianapolis. I know that didn't necessarily end the best way with that whole thing, but maybe that's an option for Steichen. I think that's one of the top options right now. One that's really interesting is a guy who was a head coach a number of years ago. That's Anthony Lynn. Right now, Anthony Lynn, he's a running backs coach for the 49ers, but he has that connection with Steichen. Steichen was the quarterbacks coach under him 1 year, and then the other year was the offensive coordinator. So they obviously know each other extremely well, with Lynn being an offensive-minded head coach at that point. So that would be one that would be really interesting, and I would like that because I think Anthony Lynn is a really good coach and a really good offensive mind. Another guy that I want to talk about, I think it's really the last guy I want to touch on here. It's Jamal Singleton. His current role right now, he's also with Philadelphia, but his role is assistant head coach / running backs coach. So that's a little bit of a different one from the other couple guys who primarily have worked with the quarterbacks. He's more of the running back kind of guy as well. So those are just a few examples of probably a lot more other guys that are going to be probably on a short list for Shane Steichen. But if I had to put a guess to it, I'd probably say some of these guys are there for him and are going. One of these guys is probably going to be his choice, if I am guessing. So I know there's a lot of names right away, but that's kind of my thoughts there, guys, on who I think would be some potential assistant coaches, primarily at the offensive coordinator and the offensive line route. Now, there's going to be some other positions that need to be filled. We'll see on wide receiver with Reggie Wayne. We'll see if they retain him or if they decide to go in a different direction. We'll see about the tight end position as well. And then we'll see what happens with Gus Bradley and Bubba Ventrone. I mean, I'm not really sure, but it seemed like with Gus Bradley and Bubba Ventrone both being present at the press conference, and Gus Bradley seemed in really good spirits, it seems like the signs would point to them potentially staying on with the Colts, but never say never. We've seen crazier things. But, guys, just wanted to give you my kind of quick thoughts here and, kind of gathered over a bunch of different stuff, some research and stuff, looking at some of these guys who had some connections with Shane Steichen and some guys that would make a lot of sense for him and for the Colts moving forward. Obviously, we're going to get some word probably here in the next coming days and weeks about this coaching staff and how it gets filled and what positions need filled and stuff of that nature. But keep it here, guys. We're going to continue to pump out the content talking about the Indianapolis Colts. And now that they finally hired their head coach, we can start talking about some other things, not the head coach related. We can start talking about other things that are different and unique. We're not talking about the same things over and over again. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. Really appreciate all the support. You guys are the best. And as always, guys, go Colts.